So, I don't know you guys, but there's more and more feeling the pressure of Christ or culture, God or government, the question of who we will serve, right? As the interests become more and more clearly on a separate path. And this has become a very real decision for Canadian Christians right now. We are still very blessed. You guys, you have no idea how much the United States, we still have more religious freedom than almost any other nation out there. We may feel the pressure, but everyone else feels it worse. And they're feeling this in Canada right now, especially Christian schools. Because recently, the Minister of Education in Canada decided that they were going to institute a new policy against bullying. Sounds great, right? And this even includes Christian schools, because in Canada they don't have the protection that we do here in the United States. And so along in these policies that they want to change included biblical statements of faith. For example, the principal of one of these schools called Calvin Christian School in, I think it was Alberta, I'm sorry, I wrote that down. He said, within this policy, there is a provision containing language which suggests alternative viewpoints are not equally legitimate, which is disrespectful of diversity and thus inconsistent with the law. There's a reference to men and women is highlighted as a provision which they consider unwelcoming, uncaring, or disrespectful. So, great, they want to stop bullying, but they say bullying includes the belief that there are moral absolutes and that there are actually biological distinctions between men and women. So if you say there's a right and wrong, you're a bully. If you say you are either male or female from the moment that you're conceived, you're a bully. So the principal of the Christian school stated, ultimately, if it comes down to a choice between Minister Ekron, who says I cannot use the words male and female in my policy, or Jesus Christ, who said from the beginning of creation, he made them male and female, if we need to line up with Minister Ekron or Jesus Christ, the choice is very clear, right? And this is something that we see, I think, ever more clearly as the Western civilization, which was founded or really strongly developed on Judeo-Christian principles, is diverting more and more away from those. We see more clearly the gods that they want to worship, the rights that they think are absolute and needed above all else, where they think that we're going to find as a society happiness and joy and victory. And they're fine with us having our Christian schools and our churches as long as we bow to their gods too, right? Like, fine, you can have your church. Just don't go outside of it and say anything about anyone else's religion being wrong. Or it's fine if you have your Christian school, but it has to be accessible to our new moral relativism. But as we'll see, and as you guys all know, of course, Jesus Christ is always the safer bet to follow because he rules no matter what anyone else thinks or does. And we're going to see that here in the darkest situation for Israel, that God is still ruling just as Jesus is still ruling today. So, let's remember, and we got to review. Oh, I'm sorry, I want to put this up. I want to put the little quote up there so you can read it. But, that says, the situation looks bad in 1 Samuel chapter 5. Does anyone remember what's bad about Israel's situation in 1 Samuel 5?
They lost the ark.
They lost the ark, yes. And why is that a bad thing, Richard?
Well, they thought that was the object that was going to save them.
Yeah.
It was almost the focal point of their worship in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was considered the very presence of God. It led them into victory numerous times before. What else?
The glory had gone out of Israel.
Yeah, the glory had departed from Israel. So here the blessing of God's presence being among them was gone. So the hope is gone. What else? What's bad?
The priest died.
The priests died. The high priest died, his sons died, and a whole lot of men in Israel were slaughtered. Like, and again, this was a chance where they, and now the Philistines are encroaching upon them. Shiloh has been destroyed. That was the place where they worshiped. Their temple is gone. Right? But in the midst of all this, when God has been captured, we know this was all part of God's plan the whole time, right? How do we know it was part of God's plan?
Everything is part of God's plan.
That's true. That's true. Most certainly. Most certainly. But what did God say would happen years before this situation?
Concerning Coffee, Phineas, and Eli, he prophesied doom.
Yeah. He said they would all be doomed, and in the midst of all of this is that prophecy taking place, right? God's basically saying, this is going to happen. There's going to be this sad, you're going to be cut off. Now, we got to remember, we are living in the time of the judges, when everyone is doing right in their own eyes. And so even as God leaves, His glory departs because of their evil attitude, their sin. It's because they've been doing this, that they have been doing what is right in their own eyes. Instead of submitting to God and asking for forgiveness, they tried to force the ark to win victory. All this is trying to set up God's choice of a king to rule over them. Remember that. And today, if you're going to take notes, you see along there, we're going to talk about how God conquers his supposed rival gods, even in apparent defeat. Like, God's going to show his power over these other gods, so when he sets his king up, it's clearly known that it is God who is rescuing his people, not the king. Right? So, first part, the story is divided into two parts. God's hand undermining his rivals and God going against the wicked people. So, verses 1 through 5 of chapter 5. Can someone read that? We're going to see how God undermines his rivals.
When the Philistines captured the ark of God, they brought it from Ebenezer to Ashod. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it into the house of Dagon and set it up beside Dagon. And when the people of Ashod rose early the next day, behold, Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground before the ark of Yahweh. So they took Dagon and put him back in his place. But when they rose early on the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground before the ark of Yahweh. And the head of Dagon and both his hands were lying cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. This is why the priests of Dagon and all who enter the house of Dagon do not tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day.
I love the image, don't you guys? So, it starts off, of course, with the capture, quote unquote, right? Because we all say it's not really a capture, right? But the Philistines have won a massive battle against Israel. So much so, if you recall, that it said the people didn't just run back to the camp, they ran to their homes. The army disbanded, victory was the Philistines. And here they grabbed what they believed was the power and presence of Yahweh. They have taken their God as a captive of war. He's a prisoner of war, taken away. And last time I mentioned that we believe, because of the way the chronology lines up, this is happening at the same time that Samson is doing his judging in the south. In Judges 14, verse 19, we read, you don't have to turn there, we're not going to turn there for the sake of time, but that he's down in Ashkelon in the south. Way down here, Ashkelon. But he's taking care of Judah up here. But Shiloh is the north and Ephraim. So it was hard to travel back and forth. God raised different judges, sometimes at the same time in different parts of Israel, because there's no king in Israel. They're divided. So it makes sense. The Philistines are getting beat up by Samson, the big strong man, and he is just wiping the floor with them. Go through all the amazing stories of what he did. And so it makes sense. What are they going to do? He is a judge of Yahweh. He serves Yahweh. let's take Yahweh, put Yahweh in submission to our God, and therefore, maybe things will go better with Samson. And eventually they do, but that's more Samson's fault, right? And so, in chapter 4, verse 7, let's go back and look at that and see, what did they think the ark was? When the ark arrives into the camp of Israel, someone read chapter 4, verse 7.
And the Philistines were afraid, for they said, God has come into the camp. And they said, Woe unto us, for there hath not been such a thing hereunto.
Yeah. So what did the people think came into the camp when the ark came in? God. Yeah, because in their minds, the objects are God. They represent gods. The gods are stuck to those objects. So what do you think capturing the ark might mean to them, to the Philistines?
They thought they captured Israel's God.
They captured Israel God, okay, and why would that matter?
Because their God is better.
Their God is better, for sure. And it's in, oh, go ahead.
Do you think they could have thought that they could use our God then, or the Israelites' God, for their savior or something?
Quite possibly. In fact, and one of the things that you often see in the ancient Near East is they take the gods of others and they serve them and they kind of convince them. So even here, Dagon is not a god original to the Philistines. He pre-exists the Philistines. So they took him and added him to their pantheon and began worshiping him. And especially because they seemed to believe that there were gods over each area, so they were kind of putting him in submission to Dagon, but they didn't destroy the ark. They kept it. Maybe use it. Doesn't say exactly, but their idea was somehow it was in submission. Now they would control the ark. And it's interesting, they take it 30 miles to the southwest to Ashdod, way down here near the coast, which is deep in their territory, away from Israel, and it's a very powerful place where this important temple lies. Both just maybe a sign of saying we have captivated this God. He would become maybe into submission to us, or we can use him, or just show that he's weak in comparison. Whatever it is. The point being is that Yahweh lays in abject humility before the Philistine deity Dagon, right? He's beneath Dagon. So here's just a picture. Because what often would happen in wars is after a battle would be defeated, the people would take their idols and carry them off away to serve in the foreign court. It was a common practice. They take their gods and either make them their own or just humble them and show them in submission to their other gods. Will you say something?
I had a question on, it says they brought it from Ebenezer to Ashod.
Yeah.
Is Ebenezer on that map?
Yes.
Yeah, it's on the top.
Yeah. It's the little one up the top. See what the number 1 is?
Way at the top.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, number 1, right up there. That's where the battle takes place. So after the battle, they win it, and they take it all the way down to Ashdod for the 30 miles to Ashdod for the victory.
What significance is that? Is that when we sing Ebenezer in one of our hymns?
Yeah, we'll come back to that in a little bit, because actually in chapter 7, Ebenezer comes back as an important part, which is where the hymn comes from. So let me come back to that in a couple weeks. Okay? But good question. Now, Ashdod is one of the 5 major, just information-wise, one of the 5 major Philistine cities. It's an important place of power. And there, sir, was the god Dagon, or Dagon. Interesting looking creature here. Interestingly, there was no information about him outside, no archaeological information outside of the Bible until the 20th century. But in the early 20th century, British archaeologists found this picture referencing Dagon from the palace of Assur-Nisir Pal. Forgive me for not saying that correctly. The king of Assyria, discovered at Kala, and now is in the British Museum. It's so cool in archaeology, like there's no proof of it, and then suddenly they find something, and like, oh, this is the same one that's mentioned in the Bible. Huh, it's like it actually existed or something. Now, Dagon means fish, comes from the word meaning fish. He's the chief god of Ashdod, and therefore he looks part fish in the picture. In this particular one, he's got like a fish head and hair. Kind of interesting, but makes sense because he's right by the coast, is where his temple is, so he blesses them in catching fish. He, interestingly, is in one of the temples for him, is where Samson actually finally dies by pushing it down. Judges 16:23. The lords of the Philistines gathered to offer great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and rejoice, saying, our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hands. So, multiple temples. And some considered him the father of Baal. So, does that name sound familiar? Baal? Where does he come in? Over and over again throughout Israel's history, being worshipped. He's a big time. And interesting, we see Dagon, what?
I mean, I've heard it said, is it Baal?
Baal or Baal?
Yeah.
Depending on how you think the pronunciation should be. I prefer Baal, but that's how I was trained to say it. But interestingly, one thing is Ashod, the city, Dagon, we have records of him being worshipped up to 50 BC. 50 BC, during the apocryphal writings, is reference to some of his worship still going on. So how important do you think Dagon is? He is Father Baal, controller of the sea, and is worshipped for centuries. Big deal? Small deal?
Big deal.
Huge deal. Yeah. Like, again, this is partly one of the reasons they took him to this temple. This is a powerful God who reigns over. It wasn't the only God of the Philistines. They took him to one of a powerful place because they had respect for Yahweh. But the ark would ultimately prove to be a very costly prisoner of war, right? Because in verses 3 through 4, we see the humiliation that takes place, right? Of course, we know how the story goes. They wake up the next morning to begin their time of worship, and they go into the temple where they find their God, where? Face down. Face down is like prostrate down in a position of worship and adoration before the ark. This picture doesn't quite get it because it's face up. That's probably not accurate, but it's the one I could find. Artists aren't always accurate. But imagine more being face down on the ground before Yahweh, prostrate, saying, this is the true God. Okay. And did you notice in verse 1, okay, look back in verse 1, who is it the ark of?
The ark of God.
Now look in verse 3, who is it the ark of in verse 3?
The ark of the Lord.
The ark of the Lord, ark of Yahweh. Okay, so we have the different names of God being used. Elohim is usually the more common name for God, the God who creates things, the God over all the world. Yahweh is the covenant-keeping God, usually in reference to the God of Israel. Why might it be when the idol's on its face, why does the writer call it the ark of Yahweh there? But when it's captured as the ark of God. Well, why the name change? Any significance, you think? If Yahweh is the God of Israel, that is his place. That is his special name that he uses in reference to his covenant people. And you're an Israelite reading this. What does the idea come to you of this foreign, powerful God lying prostrate before Yahweh mean?
The gods of the other nations serve the God of Israel.
Yeah. See, it may have appeared that Elohim was captured. because he's a God of all people. But in reality, Yahweh, same God, but the power is represented in his name. Yahweh is in control. It's reminding everyone who's in charge. And that he can keep his promises. Because guess what? Even when he's captured, he's not really captured. That's why he can keep his promises. Most of us, we can make a promise and say, I'll always protect you. And I tell it to my girls sometimes, like, Daddy will be here to watch over you. Right? But honestly, the reality is sometimes I'm not. And even if I'm there are some forces that can overpower me. And I pray that moment will never take place, that I cannot defend my girls. But it's possible. For Yahweh, it is never possible. Nothing can overpower him. Right? And so, what do they do with their God? What do they do? They stand it back up. Great. This is almost hilarious, right? A God. What kind of God is that has to be placed back up? He's powerless to defend himself. Now imagine it. You're a godly Israelite. You're reading this story. How are you going to respond when you hear that? You hear these words that... So they took Dagon and put him back in his place. What's going to be your thoughts?
My thoughts.
Yeah, if you're an Israelite and you're reading this, that they put Dagon back in his place.
They had to patch it back together.
Yeah. I would suggest we might even laugh. Right? Like, that's pretty hilarious. Like, your God fell down, and your God, you got to put back into its place. Like, this is... I'll jump ahead here to application for just a second, but sometimes one of the ways to attack idols best is to see how ridiculous they are. Like, in our own hearts, sometimes we have an idol of the fear of man. We care what people think about us so much, and we want them to think so well of us. And you're like, really? Like, so you're going to care what this person thinks about you when they don't really know you that well? They haven't been there for your whole life. Like, you're only going to be happy if they think you're the most important person in the world to them and that you are like shining like God. Like, well, that is pretty stupid, actually. Yeah, it is. Let's laugh at that and move on. So they would have maybe this holy laughter. Dagon gets set back up, and then they go to sleep. And what happens the next morning? He's down on the ground, and his, what was it, big? His head and his hands are cut off. Now, this is important because in the ancient world, to sever someone's head and hands in the battlefield were trophies, and also were used to establish body count. So when David defeated Goliath, what did he do? Chop his head off. When the Philistines defeated King Saul, what did they do? Cut his head off. It showed utter defeat, and they took the head and posted it on someone. So Yahweh here is showing complete and utter defeat of Dagon in his own house. Like, what is a better mockery? And he is showing what he will state later in Scripture, that there is no other God. Isaiah 44, verse 17 to 20. And he talks first of how a man cuts wood and then uses that wood in his stove to cook his food. And then it says, and the rest of it he makes into a god, his idol, and falls down and worships it and prays to it and says, deliver me, for you are my God. They know not, they do not discern, for he has shut his eyes so that he cannot see, and their hearts so that they cannot understand. No one considers, nor is there knowledge or discernment. Half of it I burned in the fire. I also baked on its coals. I roasted meat and have eaten. And I shall make the rest of it an abomination. Shall I fall down before a block of wood? He feeds on ashes. A deluded heart has led him astray. And he cannot deliver him or say, is there not a lie in my right hand? Get what he's doing? He's mocking the ideas. Like, this is ridiculous. You're bowing down to the same wood that you cooked your food with. Same way right now, he's going, there is no other God. Your God falls prostrate before Yahweh. And this has a huge, long-lasting impact on the worshipers. Verse 5 says, this is why the priests of Dagon, and all who enter the house of Dagon do not tread on the threshold of Dagon and Ashdod to this day. He falls down, and the threshold is the area, kind of the line, the doorpost between what is secular and what is holy, between the normal and the sacred. And so as they cross this, this idea that it stays in their mind for centuries, our God was defiled, therefore we do not step on this holy area. God's impact on them is huge. So, application of this. Because when we talk about how this applies to us then, application for us requires a little bit of what's called the application bridge. Ta-da! Principalization.
I feel like this is new. Didn't you have a different diagram of this?
Yeah, it's slightly better one because it's bigger. I can get it up here.
Okay.
It's the same thing, but just a slightly different picture.
Okay.
So, let me explain this process, because we are not, this world's a little different than ours, and yet our world's a lot the same. So, the process that the writers give on this is you have to grasp the text in their town, which is what we've been doing. Like, what is it like for the Israelites back home? But then secondly, we have to kind of say, measure the width of the river. How different are we from them? Okay? That's a good thought to think about when we're trying to apply text, especially being in the New Testament versus the Old Testament era. Then third, we have to cross the principalizing bridge and say, all right, let's connect it to us. Once we've done that, we can then consult the biblical map. Verse 4 saying, what does the New Testament say about this? And then after we do that, we can come to specific application, grasping the text in our town. I like it. It's just a helpful word picture, right? So let me express what this means. Okay, so we have seen what it meant for them. What might the original lesson for the Israelites have been as they're listening to this story? What is God trying to get at them by reading this?
God is still God, even if the Israelites have rejected him, or even if it seems like the enemies of God have won, that none of that is enough to make God not God.
Yeah. None of them is enough to make God not God. And what happens to this false idol?
This is short.
Yeah. And do you remember, we said before that in that understanding, if you beat us in battle, then that means your God beat our God, right? And so it might be tempting for the Israelites to think, well, maybe Dagon is really God. What does this show? He's not. Exactly. But so then let's measure the river then. Do we have big statues towards gods here in Western civilization? Do people bow down to big statues and fall on their face? No. No, not literally.
They do figuratively.
Exactly. And you know what? As we try and understand this and cross the bridge, we have to understand the fact that even in the Bible, not all idols are literally there. They're not all statues. Like, for example, in the book of Daniel, remember when that big statue, the golden statue gets put up? I don't know if you know, we won't have time to look at it. Look over it again. There's no mention of the God's name. They never mention the gods of Babylon. In fact, a chapter later, Nebuchadnezzar goes forward and says in chapter 4, verse 27, "Is this not great Babylon, which I have built as a royal house by my might and power and to the glory of my majesty?" See, he didn't build his city to the glory of another god. He built his glory to himself. In Habakkuk chapter 1, talking about the Babylonians, it said in 1 verse 11 that they are guilty men whose strength is their own god. That in the Chaldeans, verse 16, sacrifice to the net and burn incense to his dragnet, for it is by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys his choicest food. He sacrifices to his own strength. So not all idols are statues. Or hold your finger here and turn to Jeremiah 44, if you would. We're going to see that we're a lot like the Philistines here. So, can someone read chapter 44 of Jeremiah, verses 16 through 18? Yahweh is calling the people to repent of following these foreign gods and to turn back to Him. And here's their response. Chapter 44 of Jeremiah, 16 through 18.
For the word that you have spoken to us in the name of the Lord, we will listen to you. We will do everything that we have made offerings to the Queen of Heaven for our drink offerings to her. We did both we and our fathers, the kings and our officials, in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. And then we have plenty of food and proper and summer rest. Since we left making offerings to the Queen of Heaven and for the peace offerings to her, we will have everything and have been consumed by the sword and
Yeah. So the Queen of Heaven is another goddess of the time there. And if you notice, are they saying they're going to listen to Yahweh, Alan?
no.
No. Okay. Why not? What are they not getting that they got from the Queen of Heaven?
They got food from the Queen of Heaven.
They got food from the Queen of Heaven, right?
And prospered. Saw no disaster.
Yeah. Interesting, isn't it? They're not worshiping the Queen of Heaven because she is worthy of worship. Why are they worshiping the Queen of Heaven? Why do they say they want to go back and worship the Queen of Heaven? What will she give them? Stuff. So again, they're not worshiping the Queen of Heaven because she's worthy of worship. They're worshiping her because she will give them stuff. So if the God is only worthy of worship who gives you stuff, who is really God in your mind?
The stuff.
The stuff. And you who decides what the good stuff is. Right? See, Israel thought that they were receiving these things from foreign gods, but God goes on to clarify, no, you receive this stuff from me. See, they were more sure of what they wanted and what they thought was best. They did not seek to learn from God about their needs and trust Him for their provision. Instead, they began worshiping their own desires. Or, as we say, they were making idols of the heart. What they wanted is what they worshipped. Or in the New Testament, Colossians 3 verse 5. You can just listen if you'd like to, but listen closely. Colossians 3 verse 5 says, "Put to death what is earthly in you, sexual immorality, impurity, passions, even evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry." Get that? Covetousness, which is idolatry. You get, what's covetousness? What does that word mean? Yeah, coveting something, wanting something, right? It's the aspect. So it's basically pridefully desiring what God has not given you or what God has forbidden for you to have. That's why you're not supposed to covet your neighbor's wife, because God has forbidden that. Or we can covet our neighbor's possessions, which we do not yet have. Maybe we could have that nice new car, but we don't. It's wrong to covet it sinfully. Puritan Stephen Charnock wrote, "All sin is founded in secret atheism. All the wicked inclinations of the heart are sparks from this latent fire. The language of every one of these is, I would be a lord to myself. I would not have a God superior to me." And civilization does this really well. Pastor Martin Lloyd-Jones of England, who was probably one of the greatest preachers of the 20th century, and he compared this humbling of Dagon, the fact that they kept lifting him up again, to Western civilization and their boastful prides. And he says, the 19th century ended with this arrogant confidence. Writers spoke of the golden age of humanism because of science and knowledge. Man was evolving into a self-made and self-glorifying paradise. Now that religion was put on the shelf, education would eradicate war and poverty. Right? This was the idea. This was the God. Science, education. But immediately, it fell on its face. The Moroccan crisis of 1911 threatened to upend Europe's political arrangements and cast its nations into war. But Dagon was put back and the situation was controlled, so the people moved on. In 1912, the Titanic, purportedly the ultimate naval achievement, a ship, according to its designer, that even God could not sink. Right? Sank! And then in 1914, a war that everyone said was impossible, the war to end all wars, took place. But it was wrapped up, and Dagon was put back in his place. And then what happened? A fall of World War II. Again and again, civilization puts up idols and says, this will stand. And it falls. And the thing is, the world doesn't mind you having your God, right? Society doesn't mind you having your God as long as it sits alongside and beneath their God. Get that? Like, it's fine for you to believe in Jesus as long as Jesus is accepting to our new cultural norms. As long as Jesus is accepting our morality of what, it's 2018 already. Come on, we got to move past this. You can still love Jesus, but Jesus would love this. But what does this passage teach that every idol must do before Yahweh? You must bow. See, we cannot serve the culture's idols. The idols of self-sufficiency, the idols of beauty, even the idols of family or of riches, of comforts. If we go to them and seek them for our hope, if we seek them for satisfying us, if we covet what they offer, instead of trusting what God gives us, they will fall too. But God shows his power not only over the God, he shows his power over the people too, right? Not only is his hand against the gods, secondly, God's hand is heavy upon his enemies. So can someone go ahead and read as the story progresses, verses 6 through 12.
The hand of the Lord was heavy against the people of Ashod, and he terrified and afflicted them with tumors, both Ashod and his territory. And when the men of Ashod saw how things were, they said, the ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is hard against us and against Dagon our God. So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? They answered, let the ark of the God of Israel be brought around to Gath. So they brought the ark of the God of Israel there. But after they had brought it around, the hand of the Lord was against the city, causing a very great panic. And he afflicted the men of the city, both young and old, so that tumors broke out on them. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron. But as soon as the ark of God came to Ekron, the people of Ekron cried out, they have brought around to us the ark of God of Israel, to kill us and our people. They sent therefore and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the ark of the God of Israel, and let it return to its own place, that it may not kill us and our people. For there was a deathly panic throughout the whole city. The hand of God was very heavy there. The men who did not die were struck with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven.
Thank you, Dave. What are the Philistines trying to do here? Get rid of the problem. But notice, they're not sending it back to Israel right away. They're like, give it back to them. Why may they not be doing that?
Maybe they were trying to see if another God would be strong enough.
Yeah. Or maybe another city would be able to contain it, or something. They want to keep it under their power.
From their city,
Yeah. Get away from us, but we still want to keep it as against us, so Israel doesn't have it back, right?
Yeah.
And again, this is just so clear. Our culture does that, right? When it comes to the God of the Bible, it's always shifting different things. For years it was, the Bible is not scientific enough. The Bible is scientifically inaccurate. And as time has gone on, we're like, actually, the Bible lines up with science better than a lot of the 18th, 19th century, 20th century scientists did. And so now it's moving around where it's like, no. The Bible isn't moral enough. See, you're right, the Bible does condemn homosexuality, but that's immoral. The Bible's old and outdated. So it kind of changed the position a little bit, right? So let's follow this path of how they keep trying to keep their superiority over the ark, even while they're running away from it. Forgive my clever lines here, but I decided to do it anyways. So it starts off with saying, Ashod says, go to Gath. They're like, get this thing out of here. Notice it starts off with, the hand of the Lord was heavy. Right? I just love that image, this weight that is put on them. This phrase is first used of God against the Egyptians in Exodus 9, verse 3. Behold, the hand of the Lord will fall with a very severe plague upon your livestock that are in the field, the horses, the donkeys, the camels, the herds, and the flocks. Exodus 9, verse 3. Someone flip back to 4, verse 8 in 1 Samuel. And tell me, do you think the Philistines knew where this was coming from? Read 4, verse 8.
Woe unto us! Who shall deliver us out of the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods that smote the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness.
So, plagues are now hitting the Philistines in Ashdod. Do they know where it's coming from?
Yeah.
Why do they know where it's coming from?
They have the stories.
Yeah.
I saw what happened.
They knew about what happened, so they're going, okay, this is Yahweh. It says here they're with tumors. Some of your Bibles might say bulges in there. Was it? Boils.
Hemorrhoids.
Yes. The text isn't completely clear because there's, especially a lot of the ancient terminology for medicine isn't what we would call it. Some commentators think that this was plague, because it kind of just sounds like some of the symptoms of the plague, as in the Black Death, that brought over by mice. And so here it is right near the coastal area, and mice came in from traveling all across the Mediterranean, perhaps brought the plague with them. Possibly, but the text doesn't say that. All it says is that the plague comes from God. It doesn't say it came from the mice. And in chapter 6, you have golden mice, but that's probably has more of a reference to the fact that the tumors in mice are similar in form than being that the tumors came from the mice. And if they knew the tumors came from the mice, why wouldn't they kill the mice rather than send the ark away? It's just not clear, even though it's referenced in chapter 6. So, they want one very important thing, the ark to be gone. And interestingly, it says in verse 7, again, it's the ark of the God of Israel, ark of Elohim, must not remain with us. They're thinking it's the gods of Israel, because they're using the plural, to be the gods of the Philistines. Their wrong thinking is happening here. And so they gather the 5 kings of the 5 cities to discuss what to do with it. And they say, send it to Gath, which is the city of Goliath. Interesting, powerful city. It's further inland, so you go more to the east, so maybe it's farther away from the coastal region and closer to Yahweh's homeland. Perhaps Gath contained an Israelite population of some kind, and they thought maybe they could, Yahweh would be nicer to them if he was near Israelites. We don't know. But what we do know is what happens in Gath. What happens in Gath?
Second verse, same as the first.
Second verse, same as the
A
first.
little bit louder.
Yeah. And so the people say to the people of Gath say, exit onto Ekron, please. Get it away from us. He says in verse 9, but after they brought around, the hand of the Lord was against the city, causing a very great planting, and he afflicted the men of the city, both young and old, so the tumors broke out on them. Why do you guys think? Why might he emphasize the young and the old men?
Equal opportunity.
Equal opportunity? Yeah. No one's immune. The young, hardy men and the wise, old men. And notice it's saying men, too. Not say women. Though they're probably, women and children are probably part of it, but it's the strong are being attacked. They're afflicted, right? And so the people say, get it out of here. Send it to Ekron. And as soon as it arrives in Ekron, what do the people say in verse 11? No. They go, yes, let it return to a place where it may not kill us and our people, right? Ekron says, bye-bye towards Beth-shemesh. They're just like, get it away from us quickly, please. Just as Pharaoh's officials begged Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go so that they would not be attacked by the plagues, so also the people of Ekron told their rulers to send the ark away. It's almost like the same God who got the people out of Egypt is getting his ark out of the Philistines' power. He's still all-powerful. It wasn't under Moses. And in fact, this time around, is there anybody helping God? Is there any prophet or priest or king? Nobody. God doesn't need anybody. And as they wait for the kings to gather, telling them to return the ark to Israel, there's deadly panic. People are freaking out. There's tumors. There's death. There's cries to heaven. All because Yahweh's hand is upon them. Yahweh is judging them. Now, if you guys remember, what could the armies of Israel not do in chapter 4? What were they not able to do? Conquer the Philistines. Yeah. They got conquered over and over again. But what does God do here all by himself? He conquers the Philistines. Brings them to their knees. See, it's easy to want what the world wants, to bow down to their idols, because their idols seem really nice. Like, it's kind of like fast cars, nice kitchens, fame, comfort. Oh, we love our comfort. Nice, comfortable bed, cozy ride to work, like life that just meets all our needs, loving relationships that are all about us and make us feel good. Like, I just want to be happy, right? Like, those are the idols that, especially in Orange County, people bow down to. And they really make our lives feel better. But let's be honest, so would have bowing down to the idol for Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as the names are, right? Because they knew for sure if they bowed down to Nebuchadnezzar's statue, their lives would go on, right? They would be spared. But did they know that God would save them? No.
They acknowledge that too.
They say in Daniel chapter 3, verse 17 and 18, if this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king, but if not. Be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. They didn't know it would work out for them, but they knew their God, right? They had faith not in a particular gift that God would give. They had faith in God because they knew He would be good. See, it's key for us to know that God rules and He conquers all people. Even in the moments where it seems in Western culture at times that Christianity is on the run, that we're having to defend ourselves more and more against an agenda and ideas that are contrary to what God says, God is not on the run. Our role is to proclaim that God rules over all and let Him win the battle. Paul telling Timothy when it comes to these false teachers, these false ideas, he says in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 24, the Lord's servant, one of my favorite verses, I always say this one, the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but be kind to all, able to teach, patient when wronged, with gentleness, enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness, if God may perhaps grant repentance, lead to the knowledge of truth, and they may come to their senses, having escaped the snare of the devil after being captured to do His will. See, we realize this. Our job is to teach and proclaim with gentleness and patience, knowing these people are captured by Satan, and God is going to have the victory over them. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4 through 6 says, the weapons of our warfare are not the flesh, but of divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of our God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ, being ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete. See, modern day idols are going up all the time. Even just recently in Japan, a giant Buddha statue was set up over there, and a hurricane level winds coming through. They did all their best to try and prop it up with cement and metal poles, and guess what it still did? It fell. In the same way, God always devastates other gods. Jesus Christ will prove superior, and every tongue will confess, every knee will bow, and He will bring all people eventually under Him. Our job is to hold fast to Him and keep letting others know Yahweh reigns. It's 8 o'clock. Let me pray for us, and then we'll talk about application a little bit.